Hello and welcome to Language of the Soul podcast. I'm your host, Dominic Domingo.
And I'm your co-host, Virginia Grenier.
We'd like to invite you to sit back, relax, and enjoy some inspiring conversation. Here at Language of the Soul, we know that life is story. Individually, we're the products of the stories we tell about ourselves. Culture is the amalgamation of the stories we weave about the human condition. Here's the thing. Individually and collectively, we can write our own story. Thanks for tuning in and joining in the march toward human potential. Denise Pyles is a mindfulness coach and the author of Burn Without Burning Out, 7 Micro-Mindfulness Habits for clear thinking, decisive action, and recovery from burnout. Her mission is to empower others to find nurturing stillness within a distracted world. With over 35,000 hours of mindfulness practice and a background as a former nun, Denise brings depth and insight into the world of mindfulness. Specializing in creating practical micro-mindfulness techniques, she serves as a guide for professionals in high-stress, high-performance fields like tech. Denise has crafted a unique approach that blends deep-rooted mindfulness practices with real-world applicability, offering valuable tools for managing stress, improving productivity, and cultivating resilience amid the pressures of a fast-paced career and life transitions. Welcome, Denise Pyles.
Thank you, Dominic and Virginia. Great to meet you all.
Thanks for being here.
I'm happy to be here.
Thank you. We're looking forward to the conversation today.
I guess the way I'd like to start is I did have the pleasure of, as I said in the pre-interview, watching a couple other podcasts, which was really enlightening. So I'm inspired to learn more. But one rote question we've been asking in our new season of all of our guests is to do with story. That's the spirit of our podcast. So I do remember one section where I guess it was under the context of journaling. Toward the end of mindfulness, you were talking about journaling, and you did hit on story. So I'm just going to take a chance with this one. We ask it of, usually our people in the literary world or filmmakers, people who identify as storytellers. But in your practice, I'm guessing the theme of story is pretty integral. So what would you say is the role of storytelling in culture? And traditionally, what has it served? If you trace, modern cinema back to oral tradition around the campfire, we've been doing it a while now. So do you have any opinions on what story serves in culture? And then has that evolved over time?
That's a great question, Dominic. For me, in my life growing up, storytelling is what makes us human. It is part of our culture, I think, no matter where we live, because if we're true to who we are as humans, we all have stories to tell. And we have lived in those stories in our experience. And they make great connecting points for other people to help inspire others to own their stories as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's called inspiration, isn't it?
Yes.
Inspire others.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And also this, I've learned in my life to lead a reflective life, even before I became a nun. I grew up in a family of 7, and there's a lot of stories around there. We grew up in a house of 1,300 square feet and shared one bathroom.
Oh, man.
So there was a lot of storytelling and communication that we had to get right with each other to live and have fun together and
not
growing
murder
up.
one another. Yeah.
Right.
And I'm from a family of 6. That was quite
okay.
And we at least had 2 bathrooms.
Well,
and everybody lived.
Exactly. And my parents eventually expanded the house to have 2 bathrooms or a bathroom and a half so they could have their own. But the kitchen was the biggest room in our house. And so storytelling happened around the kitchen table, almost like that ancient campfire.
Yeah. It does center around food a lot of times.
Food, for us, it was food and card playing, and listening to my aunts and uncles, my grandparents, stories of my grandparents and great-grandparents, and connecting to that ancestral story that has transformed us as human beings to who we are today. And I just really believe, too, that we're like our ancestors in that we have stories to tell. In our current culture, when people are freaked out sometimes over AI, I'm saying it's okay, because what makes us human is that we are storytellers, and we are rooted in stories that change us, that shape our experience. And all AI can do that is reflect that back.
Hmm.
So
Right.
that it's like
Exactly.
we're still human.
Hmm.
Beautiful. Yeah, that's inspiring to hear, right? Everybody's a little, like, we call it catastrophizing.
Hmm.
Everybody's, doom speaking about the future of AI, and that's a beautiful way to put it. And yeah, the way I mean, similar to what you just said, I feel like it's just taking old tired tropes and cobbling them together and maybe forming the semblance of a story, but it does take the human element to tell an inspired story, right? With
Mhm.
I don't know, thematic content of some kind of cultural value. You can't just throw a bunch of tropes together and call it a story. So
Right.
yeah, as of now, I feel like the human element is pretty crucial
Mhm.
in story
Yes.
that transforms. Anyway, that's really beautiful, Virginia. Isn't it interesting the different ways people put it? We hear
Yeah.
a lot of really universal thoughts on storytelling, but I just love the nuances of how
Yes.
each person puts it.
Yeah.
So yeah, I guess I want to go back. The logical thing is talk about the transition, right, from serving, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I believe you were involved in Catholic charities for the most part.
Yes, well, I'm a former nun in the Roman Catholic tradition, and I
Mm-hmm.
grew up the one of seven. I grew up in a Catholic family. So the
Mm-hmm.
Catholic thing was, it's sort of like in my DNA, like I'm originally from Louisville, Kentucky. I'll always be from Kentucky kind of thing.
Hmm.
And the sense of growing up in a family of seven, my parents too, my dad was a World War II veteran. So the sense of being frugal, he
Mm-hmm.
served in the Navy, and there's a whole chapter I wrote on in my book about what I learned on lessons in gratitude from my dad
Mm-hmm.
based on his war experience. But we learned that in the family of that the sense is that it was if yes, we were our relationship with our higher power, God, was important, but what was important was how we lived our lives and helping other people. So growing up, I always had this sense of call or this sense of desire that I wanted to serve other people.
Mm-hmm.
I remember clearly as a little kid, I may have been 8 or 9 years old, and I announced to my parents in the kitchen around the kitchen table, when I grow up, I want to live in the mountains and work with the poor. And they were
Wow.
like,
Wow. Who are you channeling?
I have no idea, but it's a sense of growing up and listening to saints who had done that,
Right, right.
maybe.
Hmm.
And so but I thought that was a really like that. I thought that's what were meant to live. You were meant to live to serve other people and to help
Amazing.
other people. That we're all on this journey together, and and how do we help one another along the way? I think that's
But
kind of a
do you think
value
it
that I
was, yeah, it was
yeah.
instilled in you through, nurturing like in the household, or do you feel like that's a key component of your soul? Did it come with you, or was it something again that was nurtured in you? That's pretty amazing for a young kid to say.
Yeah, I like to think that it's all of the above. That
Mm-hmm.
I was that there's an innate part of me that's in my ancestors all the way down the line
Right, right.
that has done that.
Yeah, and
There,
back to storytelling, I was about to say that is how we pass on our heritage, but there's also an unexamined level, right, at which that stuff comes out regardless. Even if it's unexamined, your historical baggage, your ancestral trauma, all of that stuff does follow you in a pretty unexamined way.
yeah, yeah, and growing up, my family. Now, when I look back on my family, we were lower middle class. We weren't we didn't have a lot of money. We were in some states we would be considered very poor, but my family was about love and service, and that we took care of each other and really were mindful. The other thing that's storytelling, here's the other story. My older brother had polio when he was 2 years old, and
Hmm.
my mom said to me, the only charity that helped her was the March of Dimes.
Mm,
Now, fast forward, it was like 15 years later, I was born, and then my younger sister was born. And so when I remember as a kid, and maybe it was that same time, 8 or 9 years old, around the holidays at this time, my mom would walk the neighborhood door to door to collect dimes for the March of Dimes. And I remember clearly holding her hand, walking around. And I said, "Why are you doing this?" And she said, "Because this organization helped me, and I want to help others and support this."
mhm.
And so that was an imprint on my life, the importance of giving back, of serving,
Beautiful.
of, that. you're not always going to be in a position where you can control everything, and
Right.
you have to lean on the help of others sometimes. And even before that happens, make sure you're giving back.
Right.
You
Wow.
know.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
that's powerful.
it is, and it's beautiful. I can see how that was instilled in you, but it's always impressive when you see somebody that's in touch with their calling so early on. Do you happen to know Joan Chittister?
Oh, yes. I love
Yeah.
Joan Chittister. As a nun, I would hear her speak several times. She is just awesome. I love listening to her because she has this passion and fire in
Absolutely.
her. And
Yes.
even at her age today, and she is still, like this sense of fire
Yep.
in a sense of empowering.
Hmm.
And in fact, the parable at the back of my book, it's an ancient parable story. I first heard that story from Joan Chittister about why not become fire. And the way she told that story was like I wanted to jump up and jump in this fire.
It's
It was
true.
that
It's
empowering.
so contagious, and especially at her age, being still giving a damn. It's so
Yeah.
inspiring to the rest of us.
Mhm.
But yeah, her story is similar. I think she said she just always was fixated on serving, literally, specifically as a nun. And
Mhm.
from 7 or 8, I think she said at a funeral, she was like, who are those ladies? And I want to be like them."
Yes. So I went to a Catholic grade school and a Catholic high school and then a public university, and I was taught by nuns in both grade school and high school. And then when I went to the Catholic university, which was public, I mean, not a university, excuse me, the university, it was a public university, but there was a Catholic center,
Mhm.
and there were nuns that were there too. But I thought they were really cool because I thought, who are these women and I knew a lot about church history. It's a very patriarchal system, but I thought these are awesome women who kind of like Joan Chittister keep
Mhm.
pushing the ball like a salmon swimming upstream, saying, hey, let's pay attention. Not
Mhm.
everybody, is on, there's some people left behind or some people that are very poor, and we got to bring everybody along.
Mhm.
And that stayed with me. I also remember another story in high school, senior year in high school. And there was a priest that taught us social justice,
Mhm.
and he said to us, as all of us as young women at that time, he said, go out and see the world. Don't just be in your bubble here in
Mhm.
Louisville or in this Catholic bubble. Go out and see the world and let the world change you
Mhm.
as you try to change the world.
Beautiful.
You know,
Yeah, well, I think it's easy to. There's a lot of tropes, and none of us know much about right life in a convent,
right.
and I think we assume it's a life of isolation, right? But it does lead me to the question. Sometimes there is just wisdom that you can access internally, obviously, and then there's life experience, two very different things. Do you
Right.
feel like there is wisdom? Again, it's kind of the idea of like a Catholic priest doing marriage counseling when they're celibate.
Mhm.
Well, there's some purity to, right, seeing the forest for the trees or seeing objectively without being in the trenches per se. So I actually think there's a lot of wisdom to be had when you're not in the trenches navigating all the muck. Does that resonate with you? Is there a kind of two separate types of wisdom?
Yes. Yes, I think you're spot on. I think it's the wisdom of your lived experience
Hmm.
and the wisdom of listening with your heart and soul
Mm.
to other people and listening time and time again, and then reflecting back. I may not know, but this is what I hear. And then I'm learning and growing in the midst of that. Um,
Right, and so we should value, I think culturally, we might want to go back to valuing not just the wisdom of our elders, but people who've devoted their life, right, to
Mhm.
nurturing their relationship with divinity. These are my words. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
People that
Yeah.
have chosen to devote their lives sometimes to isolation, but to nurture that relationship with our source. And so, maybe that's the value of, I don't know, the
Yeah.
isolation aspect of it. Didn't Mother Teresa said I lost my faith for decades or
Mhm.
something like that. Like I saw no evidence of God for decades when I was in the trenches, but I still did the work.
Right. That's a great line because sometimes people have stereotypes of nuns thinking they're always holy, they're always, like Whoopi Goldberg in Sister Act. It's a
Right.
great movie. I love that. I'm not knocking that movie at all. I love that movie. Music's great. One of the things I learned that the nuns taught me right away, even as a kid growing up in grade school and high school, is that your journey of of your relationship with God begins in your journey of self-awareness. And that sense of there will be doubts and you will question, and they would be the first to say, oh, I always have doubts. And then I think, whoa, like that could be mind-blowing. But then you say, but I keep showing up. I
Right, right.
keep listening. And then there's other times like Mother Teresa, then it's like these aha moments. Then you go, oh, this is love. This is grace. This is, sometimes I only see maybe an imprint of the fingerprint of the
Mm-hmm.
spirit or of that. But then there's moments where you feel this, wow, there's something that happened that I know there's a power greater than myself.
Right.
And there is that this is holy. So growing up with nuns and and then being a nun for 8 years was the sense that it's a journey, and it's that sense of self-reflection along with seeking, like what are you
Mm-hmm.
seeking and how are you growing in the midst of it.
Beautiful. Yeah, I think those glimpses are what sustain us, right? That
Mhm.
is faith. When you just could we handle all divinity all the time? Right?
Yeah.
I think I don't know. In my writing, I've put it that way. Like we see glimpses of divinity, or what I call how the universe really works, right? And that sustains us in our daily toil. But I don't
Yes.
know if we could handle all divinity all the time. I've never said that
Right.
before.
Yeah. That's a good point. You had me thinking of I studied theology as well after my undergraduate to do a master's of divinity, and I remember clearly learning about chronos, which is chronological
Mm,
time, ordinal time, ordinary people, or counted time in our day, as opposed to kairos, which is
mm,
God's time, and it's a moment. I tell people, remember, have you ever had a moment where you got lost in that moment, and you were so caught up in that moment that you were present, you were with somebody you loved so deeply that you lost track of time. And I said, that's a kairos moment.
yep.
And I said, mindfulness is a way to say, how can you help get lost and caught up in that moment by being fully present
Right.
and lose track of time? Then it's like, then it doesn't matter how long that moment of divinity is, because it is so there that you
It's
you don't care
timeless.
about anything else. It's
Right,
timeless,
right, and
you
it's
know.
always available, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I was
So
gonna
That's a
say,
beautiful. Sorry, go ahead.
I was gonna say, when you're talking about being present, I mean, I know you're talking about Kronos versus Chronos, and I mean, for coming from a counseling background, I mean, that's like a big thing they're always trying to teach in counseling is to be that presence. And I think when you are fully, being mindful and fully present and listening to, I think that's when we're more out to listen to the other person and allow them to
Mm,
change us in a way that we didn't expect to be changed,
mm,
and therefore connect on that human level
mhm.
that allows us to be more accepting and not so biased or judgmental in a lot of our perspectives too.
Yes, that's a great. I'm glad you mentioned that. Like another story, it's my senior year in high school. We had to do a research paper, and so I said to my parents, I wanted to do a research paper on monasticism because in Louisville, Kentucky, right outside of Bardstown, there's like 5 religious communities, and one of them is the Trappist monastery where the monk Thomas Merton lived, and he was a writer and is one of the most prolific American theological scholars that has been honored. And that monastery and Joan Chittister, the Benedictine monastery, excuse me, no, not there. The Sisters of Charity and some others, Mercy
mm,
Sisters, et cetera, all have monasteries. There's a Benedictine monastery in southern Indiana. So I took my parents with me. They wanted to go. And we went and I asked to interview people. And so at the Trappist monastery, they have a guest house where lay people can enter because they have strict cloister in the sense of they're behind a wall as monks. And so the monk was sitting there. We got there 10:30, 11 o'clock in the morning, and the monks pray 9 times a day, and they eat. So they're on a schedule. They're on a ordinal, counted, chronological schedule in their day. So the monk was very gracious. I said to him who I was and what I do, and then my parents were sitting like back behind us. It was just one room, and like in almost like the front door by the lobby of that. And I'm sitting at a desk in front of him talking, and he started sharing that he had visited. I told him that I was a senior in high school. I played basketball. What did I want to do, and why I was doing this term paper. And then he said, "Well, I was in Louisville visiting one of our monks was sick and in the hospital. And so I went to visit him and we were watching the Notre Dame basketball game. And at that weekend, it was I said, did you see that game? It was a great game. And he's like, yeah. So we had like this 20-minute conversation on basketball and the top 25 and March Madness. And I was blown away thinking, oh my gosh, this guy is so cool. He's so ordinary. And yet he's willing to sit here and talk to me and be this monk. And then my parents were like, Denise, he's got to eat lunch. He's gonna miss his lunch. And the guy was like, the monk was like, it's okay. I got this. Don't worry about that.
Mm,
And so we ended up talking through his lunch hour. I felt really bad. My mom and dad did too. And he's like, it's no problem. And he was very gracious in hospitality
mhm,
and so ordinary in the moment that I felt this sense of connection with him.
mhm,
To this day, I don't remember his name, but I did remember him talking, saying, I remember reading and learning about Thomas Merton
mm.
and making that connection. But we connected over basketball,
Wow.
and I remember that. And so that
Well,
taught me to think that what I learned in that moment as a senior in high school that has carried me to this day is that don't put God in a box or your
right, right.
spirituality or your soul in a box.
You
It's like you lay
compartmental
it
we
all.
compartmentalize it,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. So the first step I ask people, in the sense of how do I practice mindfulness? It's like pay attention to everything.
Mm,
Mhm.
Be mindful, be present to everything. Now, as a nun and from the Catholic tradition, mindfulness is mostly more known as contemplation.
mm,
And contemplation is like taking a look at everything coming at you and
mhm,
paying attention to all of it. And then what sticks to your heart and what is your heart responding to?
mhm.
What's your soul in the gut of your being? How present are you? And
Beautiful.
what does that connect to you? So, yeah.
I love it. Yeah, that seems like the ideal, right? If you can see the numinous and the profound in the everyday, right? And in my writing, I call it just bringing divinity into the
Yes.
moment.
Yes.
You don't compartmentalize it. And actually, I've been to synagogue quite a bit, but then Kabbalah, of course, which is
Hmm.
mysticism, and I really love the Jewish tradition because it's not compartmentalized. It's very much part of everyday life. And that's why it survived against such great odds, right?
Yes.
Because
That's,
it's
yeah.
integrated into daily life. It's not something you do on Sunday, right? And uh, dress up and show off your Sunday go to meeting and clothes. And, it's not a
Hmm.
social
That's
event,
right.
it's very much integrated. So,
That's right. It's,
but
yeah.
you started to hint at what I was going to prompt you to share with our listeners, which is the definition of mindfulness. Have we already defined it, or do you think there's a little more? I guess in terms of prefacing my question, I want to hear about your transition into the corporate world and tech specifically. But I have had my own brush with tech over the years, being in the entertainment industry, and I have a lot of tropes in my brain about, again, the tech culture and
Mhm.
specifically Central California.
Yes.
And I have little, probably stereotypes in my head, but I also have personal experience. So without bringing any of those preconceived notions into the equation just yet. I do want to know what mindfulness is in a business context or a corporate context. It does seem jargony, right? And it's something
Mhm.
very much on everybody's radar right now. But what is your definition of mindfulness? And then the second part of the question is why is that needed in the corporate world, or why has it entered the conversation in a corporate context, if that makes sense?
Sure. So I just want to let listeners know that in my book, my first line of of the book is, "I'm a former nun working at Microsoft." So that's the tech at the time of this podcast episode and at the time of the writing of the book. And I can tell the story of how I made that pivot later. But one of the things about not only tech, but this is what I think about life is. It's like, imagine, and I went to a birthday party one time for my nieces at the time who were 13 years old, and we went to a place that had a ball pit and within a bouncy house. And life to me today is like we're all in this ball pit bouncy house of life, where so much is coming at us at the speed, and tech is just like that. There's so much coming at you, and you ask yourself, how do I know when to focus on the right ball? How can I be still in the moment and let all those balls pass except the one that I need to pay attention to right now?
Mhm,
And so backing up, it, mindfulness, I think too, like you call that a lot of tropes. I think that's the in word today for this
mhm,
part of our own personal development.
mhm,
Several years ago, the personal development word was spirituality. But I
Mhm.
think sometimes people confuse spirituality with religion, and then mindfulness has come in, and I think that's mindfulness is substituted for that word.
Right, right.
That's what
Yep.
I thought. But again, like John Kabat-Zinn is one of the, as a medical doctor, there's great medical evidence of the practice of mindfulness. Now, I also ask people the image many people think, and this is not a criticism because is to if you if you could sit. If some people think mindfulness is if you could sit for several hours and meditate, and I say yes, I did that for when I was a nun. I don't do it today, but in the corporate life outside of being a nun. But it's like, if you have time for that, that is an excellent way to practice mindfulness. So
Mhm.
then I thought, well, how can I practice mindfulness? Again, I went back to science and I thought of physical fitness, read where high impact interval training is the benefits of that is just as much as a 2 hour workout. Also, looking at the data around mindfulness, again, getting lost in kairos, timeless moments,
Mhm.
it's practicing many, like a minute, sometimes 15 seconds or 5 minutes of focused, intentional activity, such as focused breathing, such as focused stillness,
Mhm.
focused silence, saying being present in the room, or making a coffee break and or a tea break, and making a cup of tea and just holding that cup of tea and feeling the warmth and the aroma and being in just that moment
Mhm.
for whatever time. Those I call micro mindfulness moments.
Mhm.
And when you stack those over time, which I have been doing for many years, and I did that even as a nun, it's that sense of feeling, spiritually fit, or
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
sense of fitness, that sense of presence, because it's also with micro mindfulness, the other side of the hand is self awareness and understanding what I desire in life and what is my core value in life, and then making sure that I bring that to the moment, bring that to be open to what the moment will teach me and help me and shape me, and how I can give back to that moment with what I desire. For example, love, service,
Mhm.
as an example. So in the corporate world, I have worked as a program manager for the past almost 15 years at Microsoft, and I learned very quickly that corporate executives are human just like me. My dad said to me when he was in the Navy, he says, I know the hierarchy. The guy puts on his pants the same way I do, Denise. You treat that person with respect and listen. That was a big deal for my dad.
Mhm.
And he was saying, it doesn't matter what their title is. They could be the CEO or the janitor. You treat someone else with the exact human respect and dignity because they're on this journey just like you. And that was ingrained to me since probably when I was in utero. you know, I so so in the corporate, then I learned not to be overwhelmed or intimidated by, because I work with corporate executives a lot. And then so that sense of presence to them, or presence to people in a meeting, and paying attention. So all those skills I learned, I had people skills that I learned, and I worked with an incredible amount of people in my years in ministry, which was almost like I was 45 years as a church musician from since eighth grade. And then 8 years as a nun, but over 20 years as a liturgy director of worship, as a theologian, etc. So
Mhm.
that sense of people are people and paying attention to that first, and then getting the work done behind it. So, like, I remember clearly there was a meeting that I was in with the leaders, same team members. We had 3 back-to-back or 4 back-to-back meetings over and over to try to solve a technical issue in engineering requirements. And by the third meeting, we were just chippy at each other, and we were stressed. And I knew we needed a break, but we had to keep pushing to meet a deadline.
Mhm.
So the first 15 seconds, I said, all right, let's everybody just stay on camera and just pause. Put your mic on silence, but stay on video, and just let's just together. I'm going to be the timekeeper, but let's just take 15 seconds of silence to make sure we're all in the room to talk about this meeting. But let's just mentally get here just with this topic. Let's let go of everything else that happened in the past 2 meetings. And I said, go. And I did the 15 seconds. And after that, one of the leaders said to me, thank you. I didn't know I needed that.
Mhm.
And so I knew that those moments are sticky with people, that resonate with people. And I remember doing a project with another team that I was on a couple years ago of how to improve a process. But then
Mhm.
I said, "Did you know that?" I said this to my boss. They said, "Did you know that for corporate executives, we've got like about 20 seconds to get their attention?" And she's like,
Right.
"Yeah." And so I remember writing a talk and giving a talk to people, to that team about you know, you've got 30 seconds to get your attention because executive presence that's the new currency, not money,
Mhm.
but it is money for that. And how do you get people's attention or
Right.
be attentive in the moment? So again, those are kind of examples of what I learned in corporate, and I felt it, the high stress, high
Mhm.
stakes moments in a corporate, top corporate company.
Mhm.
But as a program manager, people are people, and I've been in the room with VPs and leaders and colleagues at my level,
Mhm.
and I off my intention has been to offer that presence and be mindful of how we work together.
Mhm.
Um, and
Beautiful.
yeah, and then the outcomes come. The outcomes
Right. Well,
happen.
that's I guess I'm gonna try to find the best way to formulate this question, but that kind of hints at one thing I wanted to ask, which is again a lot of tropes, right? But I think when I hear mindfulness being sort of integrated into the corporate arena again, or into best business practices, it does seem outcome focused. It's for productivity, really.
Mhm.
So I guess I'm trying to find the best way to formulate this. What is the greatest need that you're filling with your work? And what are you driven to impart into the corporate arena? If it's not just, is it mindfulness for the sake of mindfulness to contribute to our march toward human potential, is how we put it on this podcast? Or is it just to be mindful while making the almighty dollar? Like, what is your goal really in imparting this information? But also, what is the greatest need? Is it to be more productive in the tech field, or is it an end in itself to introduce more, again, divinity, spirituality, which is now mindfulness, into daily life?
That's a great question, Dominic. Thank you. So the first thing let me talk about like the sense of why I'm doing this in corporate and in regular life.
Hmm.
The first chapter of my book, I leveraged a quote from Satya Nadella for that was in one of our company. It was like a little notebook that he gave us a couple years ago on how to be growth mindset.
Hmm.
But he said, "We spend far too much time at work for it not to have deeper meaning."
Mm.
And that connected with me because I thought, yes, of course, mindfulness today, like you said, those tropes, we've got all the apps, we've got everything. And the one thing I noticed is that leadership where I work, who I work with, they practice it along with me or along with others, employees. So leaders and employees are doing this together, like we're in this together.
Hmm.
So then it doesn't feel like I'm just trying to. It doesn't feel as tropey to
Right,
say,
right.
it's just to be productive.
Do you
But when
experience resistance versus receptivity? In other words?
sometimes
Hmm.
sometimes I mean, I also experience resistance, like, no, what's the meaning? I'm also working risk management as a program manager, so now what's the meaning behind, do we have to have this, do we have to do risk management? And I'm like, yes, it's like the guardrails between how we do things. I mean, sometimes, but that's very minimal that happens, and yes, you run into that every now and then.
Right. Another meeting I have to go to.
Exactly. Exactly. So then it's my intention is I want to make every meeting meaningful, use people's time wisely, and how I connect with others matters just as much as how productive I am. Yes, I produce results, and how I produce those results matter as much to me as anything. It goes back to the story with my dad. In
Hmm.
school, my mom, they teased each other. He was the construction worker. He was a sheet metal mechanic. My mom, she called herself to the domestic engineer. She ran the house. So my mom was about, you showed the first side of your report card when came home, and this is when you got it paper, and you showed her all. She looked at the front. Did you make A's or B's? Did you do your best? Showed it to my dad. He could care less about what you made, the grade you made. He turned it over to conduct.
Hmm.
And God help you if you got in trouble for conduct. It's like, because what was he valued was how you treated other people.
Mm.
My mom valued that you did your best. And so that's my work ethic that I bring into work. And so then it's like, what helps me be, um, how I treat other people is how I be present to them.
Yeah.
how I be attentive. And not only that, within my own self, how do I show up as my best self at work? Some days I don't show up at my best self. I mean, I'm a recovering perfectionist. We don't always get it right. But the sense of giving myself and other people grace to say, I'm going to show up again tomorrow and let's do this again. Or
Mm-hmm.
let's do this again in another meeting.
Right.
And let's pause. And like I said, it was only 15 seconds and then we moved on to something else.
Yeah,
But
that shows the need right there.
right,
They didn't even realize they needed it. Virginia,
right.
I feel like you have something to say, but I just want to recap, make sure I understand what you just said because I really liked your answer, and I had no preconceived notions, but I did wonder, because I've again encountered it in my own circles where it can be jargony and it might be for pretty superficial reasons. But what I heard in all that is as long as we have the system that we have, right, and the I don't know what you call it, the economic structure that we have and the currency that, you know, as long as the system is what it is and we're all part of this rat race, we
Hmm.
might as well bring some humanity into it, right?
Yeah,
And
right,
be our best selves while, you know,
right.
I don't know. It just seems like that I can respect, like actually, because that contributes to the evolution, is the way we put it on this podcast, of our noosphere, right?
Hmm.
So
Yeah,
if our
yeah.
principles, morals, ethics, codes are going to continue to evolve, we've got to not sell out to the corporate machine or the almighty dollar or capitalism, call it what you want, the rat race. We got to maintain our humanity while living right in this system that we've created. Is that a good way of putting it?
Yes, yes. It's
That's
a
what I
sense of,
heard.
yeah, it's a sense of like, yeah, life as it is today is what it is today. But, and I may not be able to control that, but I
Hmm.
can control how I respond and how I'm present in that rat
Beautiful.
race,
Beautiful.
in that chaos, in that ball pit.
Right. Yeah,
A-
I love it. Yeah, I
And,
guess the reason I'm not playing the devil's advocate, really, I'm earnestly asking
mhm,
because I have encountered people using the jargon, but it doesn't really run that deep with them. It's for productivity. And
mhm. Yeah,
everyone's kind of
yeah,
masquerading and throwing the terminology around, but I really don't know how deeply it resonates toward the end of human potential. It's often productivity.
Well,
right.
In
I
an
was gonna say,
Oh,
HR context too. Sorry, go
yeah.
ahead,
yeah.
Virginia.
Oh, I was gonna say what I was hearing, Denise, when you were talking and sharing it, and it just kind of thinking in my terms when it comes like mental health, and the fact that our society definitely is a very capitalistic, individualistic, rat race society compared to a lot of other cultures where
Hmm.
we just from sun up to sundown basically work ourselves to death.
Us and the
um
Japanese, yes.
Yeah, but the Japanese do put exercise and do take breaks to kind of minimize some of that a little
They're
bit.
getting better. Yeah.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so they've got they're ahead of us on that
Oh,
part.
really? Okay.
Yeah, because yeah, I mean they do it as a team and stuff, but like they'll work through different martial art movements and stuff like that to for breaks as a group. But at least some of the research I've seen. Anyhow, but where I was going with that is, as humans, I mean, we naturally want to be part of a collective because that's how we survive. And on top of that, we also need to have purpose. And so I feel like, at least what you're trying to do, Denise, which is to take it from where people are using these terms and these hype words and the tropes to kind of like, capitalism, the almighty dollar, and, you know, basically productivity is the end result and that's what we're looking for. It's all about the bottom line
Hmm.
is to say, look, we spend a majority of our time here in these jobs and we've got to find a way to find our purpose to where we can meet that higher need that we need, on a spiritual, mental health, mindfulness
Hmm.
level. um
But my
Go
mind
ahead.
goes to like that's still productivity. Like this,
Mhm.
the Scrooge, A Christmas Carol kind of talks.
Yeah.
Like you have
Yeah.
to value, and Trader Joe's is really at the forefront of, I guess it's called shareholder mentality, not stockholder mentality.
Hmm.
So
Mhm.
a healthy, happy employee is a productive one. So the cynical part of
Yeah,
my
well,
brain is like it's still productivity.
it is, but I think, and that's where I was going. That's where I was going to go with the stomach. Is I think at least what I'm hearing is you're doing these things, and yes, the end result is still the same. It's still high productivity out,
Hmm.
but you're doing it for better reasons than just I
Right.
don't give a crap about how you feel. Just get in your office, do your job.
Right.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah, it's a good point. And I think for both of the questions that you ask, it's such a fine line because outwardly it may look like, Dominic, what you
Mhm,
said,
mhm.
it's all about productivity. It's all about capitalism. Yes, that's the reality of
That's
working
the
in corporate.
system,
That's
right?
the
Mm-hmm.
system. And it's about how I show up with intention and
Beautiful.
how I treat other employees. And in fact, one of my colleagues said to me, even before I wrote the book, they said, Denise, I always love that you when you're on a call because I know you remind me just to slow down for a moment.
Wow. Mhm.
And I
And
thought,
not
yes,
forget who we are.
right. And
Mhm,
so then that sense of just being mindful, and the pandemic also helped us. I
mhm,
believe during the pandemic, I remember clearly we at work we were just working crazy hours of nonstop, like more than the workday. And at one meeting there was one there where one person, a colleague, came on, and like the first times on Zoom calls or Teams meetings, they
mhm.
were, it was like this awkwardness of how do we figure this out, and we would like to learn because it's now part of our work, everyday work life. And at one point, this person was, you could obviously, she was in tears, and she just said, I'm just not at my best today. And so we just stopped as a team and said, how can we just help you just be present to that? And we
Mm.
just paused and let her be and just say, hey, we just want to support you. And we'll get the work done. And so that was like, I thought this was the best meeting of the entire week, you
Wow.
all.
Mhm.
But I thought, wow, that sense of being that attentive to our colleagues and present, that helped us, no matter how we show up, giving that person grace to say, it's okay.
Mhm,
You know, I'm dealing, the topic was dealing with aging parents in the midst of COVID.
mhm.
And it was like, I'm dealing with that too. So then we just stopped and talked about how can we support one another in that topic as an example,
Beautiful. Mhm.
and I thought, wow, we're trying really hard to be productive, and we are being productive because we're being present.
Yes,
And
yes.
when I look back on that moment, the work got done. But what was most important to me in that moment, in that
Mhm.
experience, was like I always lean back and I lean in to that experience of how to give my colleagues grace
Mm,
and
I
ask
beautiful. I
for
love that word.
grace.
Mhm.
Yeah, I was gonna say I loved what you just brought up and how your conversation was about aging parents, because that was kind of the other thing that I was kind of curious about is if we're better in our cultural society, the way that it is designed, um, around capitalism, because that's literally what it is, and the productivity that we all put out. As we become more mindful in what we're doing in our higher purpose and callings in life, I feel like by bringing that into work, allowing people to have that space to connect on those levels,
Mhm.
I feel like we may start seeing a shift in a lot of, I don't know, in corporations so much, but at least in the majority of the workforce, maybe to where the productivity that we are putting out is maybe more of a contribution toward a better society. I
It's
mean,
gotta affect the right? The micro
yeah.
affects the macro, so
Right.
yes, one
It's
hopes.
like it's like building those tiny muscles in between, in your legs or arms between the big muscles, and
Mhm.
it has that effect of strengthening the whole,
Yeah, if we're
sort of
all little
mentally.
cells in this organism, right? If each
Hmm.
cell has a more mindful approach to business, how could the product not evolve a little bit, right?
Yeah.
The
And
product and what it's contributing to the collective.
yes. And then the other thing I think mindfulness is helping in the sense of being present. It's not only like it output is productivity, but the other output is its benefit is it's helping us manage burnout.
Right, right.
People in corporate, I mean, I know this, I had was experienced the signals and symptoms of burnout a couple of times in my career. It's like this, I know it for me, it shows up when I'm just mentally and physically exhausted,
Mhm.
and just there's no energy. And the sense of micro mindfulness, one of the benefits is like I can practice that during the day. I've had a busy day, back to back meetings. One time I counted one time I had 17 meetings in one day. And I was intentional about taking the micro breaks in between. And by the end of the day, yes, I was tired, but I was also energized. And when I pivoted at the end of the day to family, I was present, and I thought, oh,
Mm,
I'm glad I did that. But then there have been other days when I'm so exhausted. It's like, okay, you guys, I am going to bed. I just, I'm not my best
mhm,
with pivoting to family or pivoting to work, either
mhm.
Mhm.
one. Um, but yeah, that sense of it's the other thing about, and I'm bragging a little bit because I'm so proud. I work with such great people, and I remember even this week, like there was an org change or pivot of some leadership, and it was the sense of seeing my leaders practice vulnerability,
Mm,
and it felt very genuine. Now that I find that sometimes challenging to do on a virtual call,
mhm.
but to see that and to embrace that and to hold that while their leadership was changing and people showing their appreciation and vulnerability by crying and just holding all of that, how much they, that sense
That's
of genuine love of working with colleagues
yeah,
and knowing that they're moving to some other role, but taking that moment to honor that.
it's beautiful.
Incredible.
It's leaps and bounds, isn't it?
Yeah,
It's a whole new model.
right. It's a
I
whole new model. And
Well, here's what I
it's,
keep
yeah,
hearing. I want to go back to burnout in just a minute, but I love it. You're giving us a lot of information, but there's so much to follow up on. So
sure.
I want to just back up a little bit. I mean, for my own growth here, because I'm having a little arc, I guess what I'm hearing over and over again is since the system is what it is, and I guess it'll continue to evolve in the ways we said, right? The product might shift a little bit because each little cell in that organism is mindful, right? And then the business model changes again, I guess, toward a more shareholder mentality. So the word love has a place in these
Mhm.
conversations, but I just keep hearing, here's how we maintain our humanity. Given the system is what it is, right?
Mhm.
Evolving slower than we would like. Here's how we can maintain our humanity in these meetings. Does that make
Yes.
sense? That's what I'm hearing.
Yes. It's
And
like, yeah,
I just
it,
feel like some people are going to, and maybe you can confirm or deny this. Like, again, you
Mhm.
probably have a little resistance. Sounds like not much, especially in the tech world. And I think Google is the big example, right, of this new business model where we all get to be vulnerable and human and value spirituality. Although that's a bad word, we're using mindfulness, right?
Mhm.
I do think there's now examples and there are models for that. So things are evolving, but I don't know. Given that some people are going to be more resistant and others are going to do it for maybe more commendable reasons, not just productivity, but valuing our collective march toward human potential. You're probably seeing all kinds of everybody has a different relationship with mindfulness. Is that fair to say? But
Yes.
you're
Yeah.
still driven to contribute it to the corporate arena and tech
Yes.
specifically.
Yes. I'm driven to contribute it to the corporate arena, to my personal life, to my friends and family, to people I meet, hopefully, and sharing my book with other people. In the different podcasts I've spoken on, one podcast on men's fitness, one on women
Hmm.
menopause, this one on the language of the soul. That, but I'm also a big proponent of find what works for you, that
Hmm.
there is so much out there. There's so many opportunities to connect with your soul, to connect with your heart and mind and spirit. And kind of the other thread running through my family and through my life as a nun is that I'm an adult child of an alcoholic. And so I have been participant in ACOA meetings, the 12-step program.
Hmm.
And I remember when I got my theology degree, I took a course on the spirituality of Alcoholics Anonymous. And the one thing that stays with me, again, a nun and a priest taught the class. They were both recovering alcoholics. And they talked about spirituality is all your energy moving in the same direction, like everything's
Beautiful.
integrated. And
Integrated.
when
Yeah.
I dug deeper into the second step of the 12 steps, came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. Is that sense of, like, in AA, it's like, who is your power, higher power? It could be love, it could be your core
Hmm.
value, it could be
Hmm.
God, Jesus. That the point is that came to that journey of believing. And for Alcoholics Anonymous, I remember reading this, and I think in the big book, is that God is means good orderly direction. It's all your energy flowing together in the same direction towards you believe. So, like, for example, my growing up, my core value was love. One of the first things as a Christian, the first commandment I learned is in the from the first testament of the Jewish tradition and the second testament of the Christian tradition, of both Jesus, was the first commandment is, you shall love. You shall love the Lord God with all your heart, all your soul, and all your mind. And Jesus says, and you shall love your neighbor as yourself.
Right.
And so that sense of, that's my higher power. That's my
Beautiful.
power greater than myself. So that thread of love that I learned as family, that I learned in high school, that I learned in college, that I've learned in life, is what I bring to the table in my work and in my being and how I live today. But that sense of coming to believe a power greater than yourself.
Beautiful.
So.
Well, that
Yeah.
leads me to another question I had. It's kind of taking a different direction, the order here, but you've pretty much answered all my questions as far as your motivation and what you hope to contribute, but also the need that exists in the corporate arena. It's all kind of making sense to me. It's a little bit like putting the cart before the horse for
Hmm.
me, because I just see the big picture spiritually, and you are going to see the gamut of people in different relationships with a higher power, however they conceive it. So, but I do like your everything you've said. But I don't know. I guess because I've had brushes with tech people
Hmm.
and in entertainment, there can be a left right brain standoff a little bit. And I know we're using those terms less frequently now, right? Every task involves both hemispheres of the brain to different degrees. But is it fair to say tech people are largely left brain? Is that a generalization you would make?
Gosh, it depends. It depends on the job. I mean, I've worked in tech from uh, sales to
Hmm.
cybersecurity to finance to engineering, technical program managers
Hmm.
to now HR and risk management and policy. So it depends. And like the beauty of working at a company like Microsoft is that they really do live and practice what they believe about. It's the first job I've had in my life where I've received equal pay as a woman.
Mm-hmm.
And they practice what they preach about. you know it doesn't matter who you are. We welcome everyone, and you learn that people have different degrees. Like there's PhDs, people in the Navy, people who are former convicted felons in cybercrime, or
So a lot of
um,
diversity, no
and
one
someone is a
role.
history teacher, and someone is an admiral from a nuclear submarine a couple years. So you have the whole gamut. So it's left. So it and the depends on the kind of work.
Hmm.
And the so I'm in awe. I go back to a story as a little kid. I told my parents this, and even my dad when he was living, that because he knew was still living when I got my job at Microsoft. When I was a little kid, I loved to play with the little Hot Wheels cars, and one of the gifts I got from my parents was this plastic fold up mini city. And when you unfolded it, and it's like you could run the cars all around it. And I said to my parents, I said, it's like driving to Microsoft at the time I was driving to my job I said, it's like driving to the United Nations and I'm in that mini city driving around there, because it's just that sense of that mentality, that corporate mentality. Now, I also know that's not the experience of everyone's experience in corporate life.
Hmm.
But that sense of, I keep thinking, what can I control and how can I be present? And I know too, like the sense of left and right brain, but if it's not working, or if it's in such a toxic environment, the sense of to find the courage or to find a way to pivot out of that and move to what, I'm a big proponent of find what works for you. Because if it's working for you, it generates this life and this energy that you can get through challenging times, or you can get through the left and right of right brain thinking, left brain thinking, and maybe people who don't buy into that, but it's like I can still be present and be respectful, etc.
Hmm.
So that's kind of the challenge. But you know, I feel very grateful. And also, then there's other times when it's really hard, and it's the work is overwhelming and exhausting, and
Well,
then I have to
I
pause
was
and kind of evaluate that sense of what the other side of this, Dominic. For me, it's like it's the mindfulness, it's that sense of service and mission. The other thing behind it is my own self-reflection and self-awareness, kind of that centeredness within the soul of my being.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess I want to go down that rabbit hole a little more, and maybe it's a false premise on my part, but I guess to better explain the premise of my question, it seems to me, again, my exposure to people who identify as tech,
Hmm.
you'd have an artist working with a technical director on Deep Canvas on Tarzan, for example. We had some new
Okay.
technology we were trying to integrate, and you just always had an artist working with a techie, right? And so there were definitely differences in worldview and approach and across the board. But I guess I was thinking if you're not using the word spirituality or using mindfulness, I just was wondering if there are any generalizations one could make about, do you have administrative people and production people and technicians, meaning IT people? You probably have all kinds of positions, right, at
Hmm.
Microsoft. So
Yes.
is it Microsoft? I'm sorry.
Yes, it is. Yes,
Yeah.
and it's like yes, you have left brain, like artist and the tech person, the engineer,
Hmm.
working together all the time too. As a program manager, it's like you're juggling both of those. And
That's right,
then
and that's what I was wondering if you could confirm my hunch that there's a very different mentality, from artists who identify as creatives, and that would be
yes,
more right brain, and
yes,
techies who tend to be more left brain. But one correlation that just occurred to me that now I'm inspired to pursue is, if you are more quote unquote left brain, linear, logical, as opposed to being more intuitive, nonlinear, which would be right brain. Ironically, if you're linear and logical, you're going to look for structure, right? And so that's
hmm,
rationalism, actually. So, do you know the word teleological? Any belief
yes,
system is
yeah, yeah,
teleological.
hmm,
So, ironically, it seems like tech people could be more faith based or more spirituality or religion based or simply receptive to mindfulness because they have that teleological slant or bent. Does that make sense?
yes, it does.
I
I'm a
tend to think of.
musician, and
Mhm.
mathematics is a very music is about math, counting like in
Right.
numbers, and it's mathematics is a very spiritual discipline.
Yeah. Yeah,
You know,
I tend to
yeah.
think of artists as being generally more spiritual in an earthy humanity sort of way, but ironically, teleology would belong to the left brain. So anyway,
Yes.
just looking for generalizations here. Sorry for that.
No, Dominic, this is great because here's the other thing I love because the premise that Satya Nadella when he began over 10 years ago is like the sense of growth mindset, leveraging Carolyn Dweck's book on mindset. And even today, we have what is top of mind even today with AI and everything else is storytelling, regardless if
Mhm.
you are an engineer or on the artist side of working in communications and marketing. I clearly remember when I was in cybersecurity, one time I was driving and leading some governance meetings and meetings with executives. And I was also the liaison with engineering coming to bring an issue or something. And we had a template of slides and they would come in first. And I said, let's meet before that you go in to talk to an executive. And I remember one several engineers come in and they go right into all the details and I say stop, stop. It's like you got to start with a
Mhm.
story, tell something
Right.
about the day. Why is this data so important? So then it's like it made me change my template to the first slide is just a summary slide, but I said you got to start with the story because I said all these guys and women leaders, they are juggling all these colored balls in their head. They come into the room, and at this time we were meeting in the office, and I said, "You got to get their attention to say, hey, today we need to focus on the blue ball, and the blue ball is about X data, and it's impacting these customers, and let me dive into this number, and so that then they got it." So it's
Right.
like, okay, so let me take all of my I said, you just take all your logic and bubble it up. What's the one or two things you want to get their attention with? And
Right.
that worked, like as an example of getting the left brain and the right brain to kind of
Yeah, story
cohabit.
story. I'm so glad you traced it back to story because that is the
Yes,
spirit
it's
of our
story.
podcast. It is, that's
Yes.
the umbrella under which that's
Mhm.
where the common ground is.
Yeah,
So when
yeah,
you had the IT people working with the artist on a single scene, the goal is to tell a good story.
right.
But what you just described also hints at, again, it can be a buzzword. And that is a big premise of my book too. We all know, right? You change minds by touching hearts. And there's a whole chemical basis for why storytelling. You learn more in the narrative realm than the didactic. You're more receptive to even opening your pocketbook, right? If you're engaged in a story and all the chemicals, the dopamine and all
Yeah.
the euphoric chemicals are flowing, there's a trust, there's a little more trust and a little tribal bonding that goes on. So, but when I heard the buzzword story for opening a pocketbook, I don't respect it quite as much as I want to tell an inspired story that the universe solicited from me for the
Hmm.
sole purpose of contributing it back to the collective for our march toward human potential. Like, I am a snob, I'm an elitist, and I feel like there's a huge difference between the end game. Do you know what I mean? The inspiration that
Yeah.
actually comes from the universe itself, and then using story as a tool for propaganda or opening a pocketbook. So I guess I have my own hangups about it. But the reason I wanted to explore some of these nuances, like right brain mentality, is I've got one foot in AI. You got to evolve or die and develop a relationship with it. And so I do have a very dear friend who's been on this podcast, Virginia,
Hmm.
who is at the forefront of finding an ethical use of AI where
Hmm.
artists
Yeah.
are compensated and they receive their royalties. In other words, you're not scraping the entire internet for intellectual property. You're taking licensed material provided to you by an artist who is willing to let people scrape that database. And
Right.
so it's got to be done. And I think it's kind of like digital download. It was the wild, wild west at one point, and then we
That's
slowly
right.
learned to regulate it. So this has to happen, and I'm on board. I'm part of this. I'm on the ground floor of this new ethical way of allowing AI to compensate artists fairly. But it's tricky, and I do see him, because he's a partner in this venture, really having major standoffs with tech people who may not have the same worldview or value system that he has. So I'm kind of seeing it up close and personal, if that makes sense.
Yes, yes.
Yeah,
And that
I'm
is a huge challenge, I think, in today with AI as well. And, I know there are companies, it's not just Microsoft, but there are other companies that are, makes, what helps me is the sense of that I see it in my lived experience at work, that Microsoft is intentional about ethical AI and about diversity and inclusion, about equal pay, equal treatment, and it
Mhm,
is reflected in the work that and I've experienced it, and I know other companies do that too. And so
mhm,
that sense of being, doing this with intention and purpose, and
mhm,
then the output of that, what I know is that when you can see some of their commercials. And if I've cried at some commercials because I've seen in like Microsoft or Google or even Apple about they're committed to making a difference. Yes, it's about
mhm,
the money, the revenue, yes, but this moment was about including, like, the commercial I remember with Microsoft was when the Xbox device for those who have different abilities that they could use a device, and like it's like these kids gaming, and
mhm.
one kid who was in a wheelchair was included and was able, like, that when it became one of the top gamers, and it was just a
Right.
story, and in the story it was what moved me, and
Mhm.
I thought, wow, so it is that journey, the same
That's
thing,
almost an example of what we were hinting at earlier, which is the product is affected by the culture, right?
right.
So the
Hmm.
the product shifts and it is more about diversity and inclusion now. I love that. Yeah, I'm
Hmm.
not bagging on anybody.
No, no, but
I
you've got
think the
to, this is, and great, it's like because you're asking those questions and those are so spot on. Yeah.
they're just the logical questions to me because I'm an artist, and I
Mhm.
value the contribution as an end in itself, if that makes sense. And I
Yes.
just kind of smell this whole productivity idea a mile away. And I will let myself off the hook a little bit and say, for years we've been hearing about political correctness, right? And you can't say that anymore. You just say woke, right? And so
Yeah.
I think the
Hmm.
equivalent in business is best practices. So a cynic is going to come along and say, well, yeah, human resources is making me go to another meeting because it's politically correct, right? Or it's best practices to do A, B, C, and D. And I traditionally would say, if a cynic would say, well, they're just jumping on the bandwagon because it's politically correct. And I would always say, okay, but it's better than not.
That's
Right?
right.
It's still progress, isn't it?
Hmm. That's right.
Well,
Even
and
if
I
mindfulness or diversity and inclusion, any of these woke concepts are trendy, it's still better than not. It's still progress. And again, you're going to have the whole gamut of people that feel it in their bones and other people that are just trying to survive and conform. I don't know if I'm
Yeah.
making any sense to
No,
you.
and I would even take a step back from even using the language of diversity and inclusion or even woke, but just to say, just a practice of human decency and kindness and
Right.
respect.
Right. Virginia has heard us
Yeah.
on this podcast because I'm part of the LGBTQ community, and I had a fellow filmmaker on who's a queer filmmaker, and we both agreed, like, when you hear tolerance or you hear normalization, right? We're trying to normalize it. We both laughed and said, "Well, we're really just trying to get you to be human, frankly." So,
well,
Right.
also I was going to say another way to look at it too is it's the opportunity for growth rather than the permanent limitation. So shifting from a fixed mindset and
Hmm.
looking at them as obstacles that are like these barriers to a perspective where we're trying to find that ability to change, adapt, and improve as the human people that we
Sure.
are.
Yeah.
The human people.
The human people that we are.
Because there's some
Yes.
that aren't. Yeah.
We're all human. Sorry, that came out wrong. But yes,
No,
but
that was
yeah,
good.
toward their human potential, that's what I was
Right.
looking for.
I love it.
But
Yeah.
that's. I mean, honestly, I mean, I think, and the more we do that, and then I'm gonna go Pollyanna on you right now, Dominic, and let my
Thanks for the warning.
and,
Yeah.
and let my nerd come out a little bit. But it's probably why I was such a huge fan of like the show Star Trek growing up as a kid, because that's literally what Star Trek was
Mm,
about. That was the whole point behind Gene Roddenberry was, we can still do these things and find purpose and meaning in the things we love doing, but the output doesn't have to be capitalism anymore. It's just to improve, mankind. And then eventually, obviously, everybody in the universe as they venture out into space, but you get the idea. I mean,
hmm
that's why money isn't there on, when you watch the Star Trek world, because they've realized I just go do this job because I know it's benefiting humanity. It's not about I made 100,000 plus this year.
Yeah. I do the
Right.
job because I have a purpose.
Yeah.
And yeah.
Well,
and
that came up earlier, Virginia. You mentioned we all, at some point, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you mentioned the idea of purpose.
mhm.
And I guess I'm just taking a real meta view of all of this because one could say all spiritual practices or philosophic traditions are designed. I mean, I could ask you guys, what's your understanding? But my understanding is to limit suffering in life. And sometimes it's tranquility, inner peace, contentment, well being. We're just kind of wanting to live a happy life, you know? But there is the idea of serving something greater than yourself, right? And that would be
Mhm.
humanity. But anyway, that's, I guess, when I was trying to wrap my brain around the value in the corporate arena of mindfulness, I thought, well, it can be productivity based or it can be service. And I think it sounds like a balance to me so far, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think it's progress any way you slice it. I'm
Yeah.
clearly working out my own views on all this as we speak.
Yeah. So the nuns that I was a member of, I was a member of the Religious of the Sacred Heart of Jesus, and they were RSCJ. That's the French letters for that order, and they were founded in the 1800s in France after the Revolution,
Hmm
the French Revolution, and the illiteracy among boys and girls was at like over 85, 95%.
hmm
And the nun who founded that community, she said, if I could change, if I could educate for the sake of be an educator, for the sake of one child to make a difference in their life,
mm,
then I would start this community and do it. And so that
beautiful.
was sort of the mindset of how I lived as a nun with the other nuns, is that we were in service for the sake of one person to make a
Beautiful.
difference
Yes,
for
yes,
one.
yes.
And it sort of then it realized that we have this huge mission to love and to serve,
hmm
but how does that get played out? Can
I think
I,
you have to take a grassroots view of it,
yeah,
right? Especially
yeah,
artists that are just trying to be loved and trying to get their work out there. You always settle on, if I change one person's life, right, on an island near whatever, Greenland, then my job is done. You have to kind of look at it at that level, I think.
mhm, yeah, yeah.
No,
And
I love
the
that.
other element as nuns that, you know, um, the we're nuns are not that there's not that many of them around, but there I consider, like, we're like, when I was a nun, I thought of myself as like we're like a salmon swimming upstream, and just to remind people of saying there's something more important about life than the capitalistic rat race.
Right.
Then
Mhm.
how do you want to live your life? And that came across during the pandemic when I was sitting and reflecting, thinking that we were going to be out of work for about off working from home for about 2 weeks and then be back to work and everything would be normal. And then it's
Right.
like 3 or 4 years later. And during that time, and this is the question that nudged me, that was also the premise of me writing my book, was I said, life keeps nudging me with this question. As an ordinary person, how will you spend your everyday life doing extraordinary, meaningful work with the time you have left?
Mhm.
And so, again, that sense of chronological time is limited. Like, we only have 24 hours in a day. We will be working in a corporate environment for so many years. We have to pivot to something else at some point in our career. And then we have
Well,
a finite moment at the end time of how we are here on earth. So however long that runway is, we have no control, of that. How do we make the most of the moments we have to live so that then it becomes these kairos moments that
Right.
build up? So, yeah.
I'm glad you mentioned that. I actually have that quote written down that I heard it in another podcast, and it was one of my prompts, and you just took the words out of
Oh,
my mouth.
sorry.
That's okay, but I want to follow up and say, is that question? So life keeps nudging me with this question. How will you spend the rest of your life doing extraordinary, meaningful, see, we could explore these words too,
Mhm.
meaningful work with the time you have left? My question is, do you find that to be a universal question? I've had my brush with death, so everything was put on the front burner in terms of purpose. A lot of our guests have really had that come to Jesus moment. Sorry for
Mhm.
that.
Yeah, it's kind
Where,
of a similar question, I think.
right. Well, my question to you is, do you find it to be universal? Is it a matter of time? Does it take that existential crisis or that dark night of the soul to really light that fire? Do you find it happens sooner or later to everybody or not?
So I look at it as when I reflect back over my life, there were moments that I was asking that question, struggling, or asking that question at certain times of being in poor health.
Mm,
I haven't had a, knock on wood, like a sense of the near death experience, but I've had experiences where, oh my gosh, as a risk manager, this could have been really bad. This could
mm,
have gone really bad. Now what? Or I've also know people who says like, Denise, I haven't had that, but I said, but have you been reflecting on your life? It's like, what do I want to do? Or do you feel this sometimes nudging within you to say, or this itching that maybe I'm meant to do something else? Or
mhm,
so I think we may be asked that question in different ways or different experiences.
mhm.
I also love the quote by Mark Twain. I shared it with one of my nephews who celebrated his birthday recently. And Mark Twain said, you have two birthdays. The first is the day you were born, and the second is when you figure out why. And
Right,
I
right.
like that's like you figure
Yeah.
out your purpose. And so then I thought, yeah, I thought I knew what my purpose was at 20, and
Mhm.
at 30 maybe it changed, and now it's different, but there's threads of still things that thread all that together. And it's like purpose to me is not like one and done. I
Right,
found my
right, it
purpose and
evolves.
here's what I'm
Mhm.
done. But it's like I'm I'm still learning. And in fact, like my mom will be 98 this year. She lives in assisted living. And 2 years ago, she fell and broke her back and was on like
Mm.
dying. And at some point, she within her said, I I'm not ready yet. And so
Right.
she decided to go. She went to a rehab hospital, was really reluctant to go to a nursing home, but went to assisted living. And now she's like a cat with nine lives, thriving. I mean, it's like it's
Beautiful.
beautiful to
Wow.
see her. Like, and then she's like, she is so astute of like she reads everything. She has read practically every book in the library at the assisted living,
Wow.
and has this curious mindset at
Mhm.
98. And I
Beautiful.
thought,
Man,
so she's still figuring out her purpose. But
that's an inspiration to me. I joke,
yeah.
Yeah.
Joan Chittister and Jane Fonda, people that are
Mhm.
still relevant, still intellectually curious, get me up every morning. So
Yeah.
did she redefine her own sense of purpose, or was it just this
Or it
inclination
saved
to
her
be
life.
intellectually curious?
Yeah.
But did she
She
consciously say, "I'm not done yet, here's my new purpose," or is it
I
just that fire of being intellectually curious and
I
seeking
think it was
help?
both the fire to keep living and then to
Mhm.
say I'm willing to do this, go this route because the current route I'm going is it will lead to death
Right?
soon. And
Well,
and
maybe
so
I guess that's what I was hinting at earlier. It does seem like, again, sometimes it seems selfish, but contentment or inner peace or well-being seems to be the goal of a lot of, again, spirituality, religion, philosophic traditions. But I don't know, also say that contentment is does lie in a sense of purpose,
mhm,
right? And
mhm,
only by contributing, only by giving do we feel fulfilled.
right.
So,
Yeah. And the other thing, Dominic, I think too, is if you don't, like you mentioned this, like if you don't compartmentalize your life, if you're open to everything, that when the challenge comes, when it, like the day you're not at your best, and your life is more like a heartbeat rather than a flat line high, or flat line low.
mm,
It's the sense of that all those ups and downs when life feels like you're off-roading instead of like I just want to go on a path, then you embrace that to say, what can there's a spiritual element in the midst of it all within me and in that experience, and how can I get through this, how can I learn from this, how can I be reshaped, maybe I need to think differently
mm,
as as an example of experiencing something, a trial or tribulation. But it's like embrace it, like it's like embrace it all, and work through it all and let go, and then and say, this is working for me, let's do it. This is working for me, let's do that. And having like those this community of, like, I think Virginia, you said that we live in community. So who is your
Mm,
community of
mhm,
colleagues, of friends, of family that help you live in the spiritual, in your own growth, and journey of your self-awareness, your love, your service, whatever that is, that inner peace that you're seeking. What is it you are seeking? What is the desire of your heart? And how are you engaging the world, and how is the world engaging you in living that out?
mhm. Yeah, and you mentioned the being in a ball pit inside of a bouncy house. I love
Yes.
that, and that's why I think a
Hmm.
lot of us don't take the time to really even examine any of that.
Hmm.
But I do think that's why it takes a health crisis sometimes, or an
Yeah.
existential crisis, to light that fire, because of all the distractions.
Well, I
Hmm.
was gonna say that, and like even sometimes with people, I think it's the fear of change.
Oh,
I know I've
yeah.
mentioned before in other episodes, and Dog has heard me say that, you come to those crossroads where things are changing and you don't like the change, and so you're, kind of have a adverse reaction to
Kind of
it
like the
because
political landscape at the moment,
Hmm.
right?
Yes.
right, and instead of like you were saying, Denise, which is really hard to do. I mean, those of us who and I'm saying this very general, I'm not putting words in anybody's mouth, I'm just saying this is how I'm viewing it. But those of us who tend to maybe be a little bit more malleable or not as adverse, to change, or like, I'm okay with not being okay, and
Mhm,
are able to admit those things to ourselves. You do have people who can't do that, and they want to do that, they just don't know how. And so I think it does take, like you said, Dominic, sometimes a life or death,
mhm.
type experience to go,
To How
uh,
about to dissolve the ego? I mean, that's what a
Yeah.
yeah,
lot of we've been
Yeah.
saying here
mm-hmm,
is
Hmm.
just relinquish mind and ego, and that's how you, right, center and get
yeah,
aligned with your source.
yeah,
Yes. Yes.
Ah,
That, like, Dominic and Virginia, you said something too. I think fear has great power over us. I mean, it can have
mm-hmm,
great power, that, to be
yeah,
paralyzed by fear. And I learned this from um, a therapist I had for a while, and he's a Buddhist therapist, and practiced Buddhism. And he said, courage is, you take fear along for the ride. And,
mhm.
and it's like, and it's just taking the next step.
Yeah, it's
mm-hmm,
not
And
pretending it doesn't exist. It's
no, it's
understanding
like,
the value of fear, right?
exactly, appreciating it, acknowledge it, and courage is bringing fear along. And
Beautiful.
I thought, yes. And so when I face worry, I mean, I am also Irish and English, so I worry a lot.
Right.
And um my job is a risk manager. And that sense of, okay, am I fearful? And again, acknowledging it, being present to it. And then it's almost like this mental self-talk, because I also tell people I'm a recovering perfectionist. It's like I mentally say, fear is here in the room. I'm going to turn the volume down a little bit. And I know the next step I need to take, and I'm scared to death, but I'm going to take this next step.
Mhm.
The
I would argue.
self-talk will
I would
do that.
argue that fear is well, hope and fear, that's life, isn't it?
Hmm.
Like,
Yes.
and
mm-hmm,
actually you could replace hope with love. Either you're seeing through the eyes of love, or you're operating unexamined on your base fears. And but I do think it's very damaging. I mean, look at the mess we're in. It's
Hmm.
all fear-based.
Right.
You can actually trace it back to fear every step of the way.
mm-hmm,
Right.
But I was never in touch with that word. I just thought, well, I don't operate on fear. It's not even in my vocabulary. Like, I never had a relationship with fear, but then I realized the reason it's not in your vocabulary is because it's completely unexamined. Right?
Right.
So nobody's exempt. We all, right? And I think when we feel unsafe, we operate out of fear. And
Yeah.
then when our needs are met and we feel secure and safe, we're able to rise above that.
and I
Yeah.
loved what you just said, about having a relationship with fear. And that's really
Yeah.
what it is. It's discovering that relationship, realizing fear is there and it's okay. You can hold its hand and together
Mm.
move forward, like you said, Denise, and continue in that forward, momentum.
Well, because
Yeah.
it has value, right? If you
Hmm.
look at the fight or flight instinct, I think we
Yeah.
like to rise above our base instincts, but if we can, and it goes along with embracing the shadow, as we often talk about on here, right,
Hmm.
Virginia?
Yeah.
The way you embrace the shadow is you don't demonize all of your instincts because they have value. Even propriety, jealousy, some of these ugly things that arise in us, if you, instead of demonizing them and trying to rise above them, because then you never look them in the face, right? Never look jealousy in the eye. If you can
Yeah.
understand the evolutionary theory level of it and the value of it, then you can be freed from it. And
Right.
I think sometimes we don't want to look at our shadow, the shadow side of humanity, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I, I'm listening to both of you talk. I was thinking of the a couple of years ago, visiting Disneyland. I believe I bought the box set of, which is one of my favorite movies, Inside Out, and it was the
Oh, I
box
love it.
set of all the children's books of all the emotions, and fear was one of them. And they are the most read books in our house.
Hmm.
And the sense of what I liked about those books is that they talk about the all of the emotions, but then to see the value of fear, keeping us
Yeah.
safe, et cetera. And so
Hmm.
talking about the positive of fear or
Yeah.
anger or joy or sadness or disgust. Um, and the other thing is that that other side of fear is that sometimes we're afraid that is the vulnerability,
Mm.
and we live in
Hmm.
a culture in that vulnerability is frowned upon, and you got to be strong and be productive,
Right,
et
right. Well,
cetera.
it's the
And
Western, we're built
yeah,
on manifest destiny, right? And the
yeah.
westward
Hmm.
movement, and we're overcomers, and then the Dust Bowl, like our whole cultural identity in this country anyway, right, is about being overcomers and being the
Mhm.
Marlboro Man and John Wayne and a number of other characters.
Right. Totally.
Yeah.
And so that sense of the willingness to be vulnerable. And what I also love about in the sense of where I work is to and I see it modeled for me in leadership. I'm very fortunate to be in a role and a position where I'm in great leadership that I see vulnerability and servant leadership leading as opposed to fear and this is the way we got to do it, like this is the way we got to do it, fixed mentality.
Hmm.
It's the same,
Well,
yep, we're scared.
well,
But
also
this is
the
the step.
value. Sorry, couldn't the value of fear also be it demonstrates your attachments? If you're
Hmm.
fearful for a lot, that you might lose a loved one, that is the positive side
Right.
Hmm.
because it shows your interconnectivity. And to give a shout out, do you guys know Starsky and Hutch? He was also in,
Michael Glazer.
yeah, Paul Michael Glaser wrote a
Paul Mike.
really great book on fear, and I actually
Okay, yeah.
illustrated it. I don't know why I couldn't come up with his name, but Paul Michael Glaser, you may know his wife was one of the
Hmm.
first people that contracted, or actually the baby contracted AIDS in the birth
Hmm.
canal,
That's
and he
right.
lost both of them. So he dealt with a lot of fear. And anyway, he has a beautiful book called Crystalia about the value of fear. And I do think it sort of hints at that. Like fear is often because you have a strong affinity or attachment or love for somebody. Anyway, check it out. I did the end papers and then I colorized. Actually, it's all coming full circle. The guy with the AI operation that I mentioned, he did the line drawings and then I painted them. It's a
This is
beautiful
the
book.
best of podcasts. Is that why I love listening to podcasts? Is because then I get a book list of books I want to read. So thank
Right.
you. So
Well,
I just
yeah,
keep
maybe we'll
penciling
put
that in.
that, if you don't mind, we'll put that in the episode description too. It is related
Yeah.
to a lot of what we're talking about too.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. I love
Yeah.
that. I love that. Thank you.
Well, and I was going to say too, fear is also a way for us to basically, I guess, life giving us the reset button. It helps us
Mm,
reset because it makes us refocus.
Mhm.
yep.
Yeah. And if I could just add to bringing that to the around mindfulness is that one of the rituals that I do every morning is when I wake up is I wake up and I sit up in bed and then I just take a few moments to breathe and then I practice just this moment of gratitude that I'm alive, I get to live this day and mindful of how I'm feeling. If I'm worried or afraid, I set my intention that right at that moment and to say, I will either face my fear today or whatever that emotion is
Hmm.
and practice whatever. So it's that sense of like this past week, I've had an incredibly busy week. It was slammed with meetings back to back. And my intention and focus was I know I may feel overwhelmed by the volume of work I have to do. My intention today is to focus
Hmm.
on one task at a time.
Mm.
And and surprisingly, it was a busy week very intense, and I felt energized at the end of each day,
That's
that I
that's
had
come up
stuff
for
to
me
give,
today too.
you
You
know?
mentioned burnout a lot,
Mhm.
and again, another word I was not in touch with. Didn't mean anything to me because I always identified as somebody who committed and did my best, and but of course, I was burning out and didn't know it. It just wasn't in my vocabulary, and I won't go into that too much. But I think that inspired work is very different than drudgery.
Right,
Right? So
right,
my daddy taught me well in that, yeah, you just commit to what you've committed to and you give it 100%. And that's actually how you change your position in life, your status, whatever, however you define success. That's how you get there is by doing your best, whether in my case, it was wearing a polyester hat and serving tacos at Del Taco. You just do your best. But I just feel like we have the agency at every stage in life to make it inspired work and not drudgery.
right,
Right. And even
right.
if it seems like drudgery, you still give it 100%. And that's how you get to the next level. That's how I
Mhm.
avoided burnout until I didn't.
Sure.
Well, I didn't.
Yeah, it was that sense of setting my intention each day and say, I'm whatever I do, I'm going to do with purpose and
Mm,
on purpose. And because I find that energizing, and it's that sense of, and it's amazing when I can see that happen in my own life or see other people that happens to, like, give, you could tell, like, public speaking or leading to me, they are giving everything they have, and they come away from it and they are so energized, or they're talking about their work and doing something to help technology,
hmm.
and you see them light up in what they're saying. And it could be something as boring as tiddlywinks or counting tax numbers or something. and
Right.
and no critique to those tax accountants, but you see people light up and be passionate about what they're doing, and I thought, wow, and then I've a lot of them are friends of mine, and I said, how do you deal with burnout? And kind of like, it's like, I just make sure I'm focused on what I love to do, and if I
Yeah.
have to do the dull and boring,
To
i
get there.
i
Yeah.
I do have to get there. I set it on my calendar, put chunks of time, but I do things in between to regenerate my spirit
I'm
in
glad you
between.
mentioned intention because that came up a lot in the few podcasts that I listened to. Abraham Hicks talks about segment intending. As I go into that meeting, set my intentions,
Hmm.
again, to just see the humanity in the person across the table from me or to bring love into this equation. So I love if you could talk a little more about the role of intention setting, but also the journaling idea. A gratitude journal seems like a great thing to do. I'm not that good at doing it consistently, but maybe talk a little bit about the journaling and then the intending. Again, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're setting your intentions. And then another thing you hinted at is this idea of habit stacking. I
Yes.
think I got it, but maybe you could talk about that term a little bit. What is habit stacking?
Okay, great. Those are a great question. So first of all, about intention. One of the quotes I have in my book is from Thomas Merton, and that I found that from a friend of mine who was a priest that I worked with, and he said that in his listening and reading of Thomas Merton asked a question for himself, but it was also for all of us. What do I think of this? What do I want for my life, and why am I not there? And for me, intention is kind of helping you fill in the gap. And what I learned about intention really clearly was my first in the early years of my life as a nun, I entered the phase what's called the novitiate, where it was like a time where all you, instead of focusing on a ministry, all you focused on was like how to be a nun. And the nun who was my novice director, her name was Rosemary, Sister Rosemary. And I remember going to her and saying, I'm really scared about doing this. It's like, I don't know what it's like being a nun. And she sort of like laughed and hugged me. She goes, I'm scared too, because it's the first time I'm a novice director. So, well, let's do this together. But I said to her, and I tell the story in my book, I said, I've not lived this way of life before. So so much is new, and I'm not sure how to begin or how do I do this. And, she just said, just take a moment to breathe. You don't have to have it figured out all
Mm-hmm.
right now. And then she said, before you begin your day, praying or even serving other people, take some time reflecting on what you truly desire for the day.
Hmm.
Going back to what is your intention.
Right.
And before anything else, set your intention, and that will guide your actions throughout the day, and everything else will kind of fall into place. And so, like what you said, is like, set your intention. Now, one way you can do this is through journaling. Now, I've been journaling since high school, so I have volumes of binders of journals since high school. And there's various ways to journal. And many people say, gosh, I don't write a lot. I don't like to write. There's more than one way to journal. And technology can help us do that. So on my phone, I have a day one journal app. So my hobby is also photography, landscape photography.
Mhm.
So I make a commitment to take photos I take photos every day.
Mhm.
And I've committed over, now I'm going on 2 years now, is to take one photo a day that speaks my intention for the day.
Mm.
And I use what's called the Day One Journal app. Well, the great thing about the Day One Journal app is, like, at the end of the year or the end of the month, you can print that in a book.
Mhm.
And so now I have a physical journal book that I can look back. And I printed it one year, last year, which was also one of the most stressful, difficult works I've had at work. And I looked back in that, flipped through that journal, and I thought, wait a minute, it wasn't totally stressful. There was really
Mm.
moments of meaning and
Mhm.
energy that carried. So it was like this reflection of going, I that was a very powerful year,
Mhm.
depending on the lens. So there's
Right.
more than one way to journal. And the other thing is, people who haven't journaled, I said, I use also a commonplace notebook. I carry a notebook with me, um, and like a Moleskine notebook, or
Mhm.
I think it's Lectern notebook. Um, that I may not be pronouncing that right in German. And I just jot down like bullet points of journaling. At the end of the day, then I journal. It's like, what were all those insights today? And
Mhm.
then if you do that, even if you do bullet points or even one word a day, and over, say, 2 weeks, you go back and look at that, you see a pattern in your
Mhm.
life.
Mhm.
And
Well, you
that
hopefully you
helps
see
you.
growth too,
And you
right?
see growth. Or if not, you say, well, maybe I need to think differently
Right.
if I'm griping about this one aspect about my life all the time. So
Well, you
then,
see themes. I know
yeah, you see
there's been
themes.
themes that have recurred my entire life, and sometimes
Right.
those are peptide addictions you can actually get to the
Yep.
bottom of, you know?
Yeah. And then, speaking of what you mentioned, is this is tied to habit stacking, but also it's like, if I usually do this when I am very stressed about work or something like that, is that I set my intention in the moment. What do I,
Yep.
if I have a difficult meeting sometimes with people that may rub me the wrong way, or it's like, oh,
Mhm.
I gotta share some bad news with this team because we can't deliver what we need to, but how do we tell that story? I set my intention
Mhm.
before that meeting.
Yep.
And then afterwards, I just spend a minute to reflect on that.
Is it
Um,
specific, or is it more like I'm just going to be my best self in this room? Or again, for me, it's always like love. Nothing is
yeah.
worth conflict. So I'm going to get through this, because
Mhm.
actually, more important than making the deal is feeling good about myself and not having toxic feelings afterwards, right? But
Right.
also bringing out the best in the other person. But is it a specific intention, or is it just like I'm going to breathe and be my best self and bring everything to the table? you know?
And I could say yes to both, because it depends on the situation, or it could be, I am, every meeting today, I'm going to bring love and service and listen with love as my mindset,
That's why I
and
asked, because that
non-judgment.
always
Yeah.
seems like the bottom line. It's
Yeah.
always the bottom line. And that's similar to what we said a moment ago, which is I'm going to quiet the mental chatter, right? And get rid of ego as best I can in this moment. I
The
feel like it always comes down to that.
Yes. And I also want to say, and as a nun, in the spiritual life, I learned to, like, the nuns would say to me, like, also, what is it you truly desire in your heart, and be specific,
Mm,
and what does that look like for you?
mm-hmm.
And then to put that out there, because it's like, they would always say, be careful what you pray for, because you just might get it,
Right,
and it's
right.
like that, and I thought, well, I didn't, when I said, so it's kind of a both and,
Right. Well, and
but
another thing I've heard, and I'm not going to remember who said it. It was probably on Oprah's podcast, but maybe it was Michael Beckwith. Rather than saying, "What do I want to be doing in 5 years?" ask, "Who do I want to be in 5 years?"
right.
And
Yeah.
so there's some value to being specific at times, I think, and there's value to being
Mhm.
general. If you're
Right.
really far from your envisioned goal and you can't see the forest for the trees, it's probably better to be general and just say, actually, who do I want to be? I want to be tranquil, content, feel inner peace, feel safe, whatever it is. And then the details, the perfect job, do you know what I mean, will line up. If you're so far from that goal of, again, being tranquil, and you decide, oh, I want this job with this pay rate in this location, you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. So
That's
maybe,
right.
isn't there value to being general sometimes?
There is. I mean, like you said, just that the depending on the circumstance, how you're feeling, in that moment. It's the sense of you. what I hear you say, Dominic, is like the sense to be open and present.
Hmm.
And then when you have that you feel that flexibility to, um, like that pliability
Right.
to engage in the moment.
Well, isn't that similar to saying, "Let me do your will"?
Yes.
Saying to God, "Let me do your will."
Yeah. Yeah.
That's where we all, but there's a lot of faith in that too.
Right.
Do you know
Yeah.
Marianne Williamson?
Yes. Oh,
Again, I don't know,
good.
what your
Good
beliefs are,
stuff.
but oh, I love her. But she'll
Yeah.
say like, people tend to ask, should I live a happy life or should I serve? Sorry, Virginia, you've heard me say this before.
Yeah.
Mhm.
As if they're mutually exclusive, right?
That's
Should I
right.
live a happy life or should I serve? And so we said a moment ago, actually, contentment is in service for most of us and a sense of
Hmm.
purpose, right? But
Right.
she also said, she had somebody ask her, well, what if God wants me to be an accountant? If I surrender and say, let me do thy will, what if that is being an accountant? And her answer was like, why would he do that? You suck at math. He gave you your gifts to begin with, because I guess this person wanted to be
That's
a
good.
singer-songwriter. And she's like, God gave you those gifts to begin with, and you suck at math. Why would he? So people
Right.
tend to build up these scenarios in their head and make them mutually exclusive, right?
Hmm. Yeah, and then fear gets in the way, and then you're
Mhm.
stuck in the spinning of what you truly desire and living that. Yeah, people ask me like, "Well, what books do I read about spirituality?" And I said, I like my music list. It is so eclectic, and it's all across the board, and it's the sense of just being open and not compartmentalizing our lives.
Mm,
That being open to what can I learn today that will help me love and serve other people tomorrow. um,
beautiful. Well,
that's a mindset,
I'm getting a
to
sense that
live.
you're very open-minded. I mean, do you feel that some of the cloistered, I don't know, that lifestyle has carried over, or do you feel like the grace and the compassion is a product of having been, I keep wanting to say in the convent, or
Yeah, that's fine. That's okay. No, it's like it's amazing that sense of cloister. The irony is, from the outside, people think, "Oh, you're like locked in away from the world." The reality is, and I didn't live in a like cloistered life. I lived in a convent where we lived at a house in a suburb in
Mhm,
a city, and went, I served at a church or at a school and walked among lay people. I didn't wear a habit or anything. I had a cross that symbolized who the community I belonged to, that I
mhm,
wore either as a lapel pin on my um, uh, jacket, or on a jewelry necklace. Wear that. And so it was being immersed in the world. But if I would, and sometimes I would go to like a Benedictine monastery on retreat, just to like, or for retreat, just to kind of recenter, be silent, be still,
mhm. There's
listen.
one on my blog actually. It's a retreat for monks, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And the reality is, you listen and talk to them, they are the most fully aware of what's going on in the world. If you want
Hmm.
to go know what's going on in the world, go talk to a monk in a monastery. They are very well educated and very well informed. And you think, how do you know that? Well, like, they read everything.
Hmm.
They have access to technology and be mindful. And then and then they're also present.
Right.
Um, and so it's like, can you practice? So I my that sense of helping others find stillness. You can find stillness in your life. And going back to habit stacking,
Hmm.
it's like, I'm going to start every meeting with 15 seconds of silence. I had one of my nieces tell me that. She read my book, and she's a nurse, and she said, we had a meeting and I started that this week, and it was like the best thing for all of us, that we
Wow.
took 15 seconds of silence before we jumped into all the stuff that we needed to do.
Well, I feel like that sacredness and what's the other word? I guess, yeah,
I
nothing seems to be sacred. I was in a
I
Del
call it
Taco.
wonder as well.
Yeah,
I was
yeah.
thinking ritual, having a
Yeah,
ritual.
Mhm. Well,
ritual.
yeah, and so my quickly, I was in a Del Taco waiting to get my hair cut. I don't often eat a Del Taco, but I had no choice. So and this Latino family held hands and said grace over their tacos. It brought a tear to my eye.
Mhm,
Just because
mhm,
there's so little ritual, as you said, Virginia, but
Hmm.
also so few things are sacred these days.
Hmm.
Those
that's right.
moments, right? We can find those moments. And I love what you said about taking pictures, because here I am, an artist. I've always kept a journal because I'm a writer.
Mhm,
So I feel very blessed that the creative process for me is church, and I get those opportunities to, again, limit the mental chatter, go into gamma wave mode, and that is the equivalent of prayer, meditation, chanting. It's
Yes.
all the same thing. So I feel blessed that I have a craft that allows me to engage regularly. And some of the artists I know are pretty zen because, like you said, they're habit stacking. It's built into their lives. So I like what you said about taking a picture every day.
Mhm.
I used to have a bitchin' camera. It's my favorite thing on earth to do if I can't paint a plein air painting.
Right.
I'm a photographer. I love it. Well, now
Yes.
I'm just like everybody else. I just have a cell phone in my hand. But on
Wow.
every potty walk with Bowie, I take pictures because it reminds me of the beauty. How about just that? Even if you
Mhm.
don't print it, you don't share it on Facebook, you
That's
do
right.
nothing with the photo, you're putting something on a pedestal and appreciating the beauty that's all around us. I'm being corny now, but isn't that the value of just taking those photos? Because you're actually, there's a great book called The Zen of Seeing. So
Mhm.
being an artist is really not about having craft or technique, it's about learning to see.
Yes.
Mhm.
And
Yeah, it's that sense of being intentional, like journaling. Like some people, I say, "What's the difference between mindful journaling and just journaling?" I said, "There may not be a difference for you, but for me, mindful journaling is I'm journaling with intention. So like
mm,
I come in a sense, maybe, and it's like I'm not like in this moment, I'm not going to think about anything as an intention, but I'm just going to let it be and let listen, and
mhm,
then what am I hearing, or let go with my thoughts. Like the morning pages that Julia Cameron does in the Artist Way, I think is a great
mhm,
journaling exercise. And but the other thing is like just listening. Every one person, a colleague of mine, every hour he takes a minute to write down what's the word he's like, what is he grateful or present to, what's the word to describe his hour. And so at the end of the day he's got like 10 words of his work day, of how his day went. And I
interesting.
thought
Yeah.
that is a cool, like, but that was done with intention,
Mhm,
like mindful intention. And the sense, like you said, over you stack those over and time, you're able to see them. The other thing I want to say to listeners, if you've never tried mindfulness before and you want to, is I know, at least in the Western culture, that we want to say, let's be productive and do them all. Just pick one. Find out,
mm,
first of all,
mhm,
ask yourself, what do you like to do? Like, do you take your dog for what routine? Like, here's the difference between routine and ritual. Routine is I take my dog for a walk every day.
mhm,
It's now
mhm.
a ritual for you, Dominic, because you take pictures
Yep.
intentionally
Mhm.
of that moment.
Well, it is
Yeah.
possible while doing dishes, isn't it? To notice the
Exactly.
dapples of
Yes.
light on the
Mhm.
counter. Yeah, I read, I forget who it was saying, just brushing my daughter's hair. Like you can be
Mhm.
in the moment whenever you choose to be.
Right. Thich
Yeah.
Nhat
See the
Hanh
beauty
is
in
a
it.
great, his reading, Present Moment, Wonderful Moment,
Mm.
Being Peace. They're all about, he says, if you're going to eat an orange, just eat an orange and do nothing else.
It's
Or
Yeah.
such a
watch,
novel idea to us,
right.
isn't it?
Well, and here's something to add to that, because I've been listening to you guys kind of talking about that. So one of the things that I've been trying to do, because I'm so busy with my own studies in mental health, and then doing the podcast here with Nick, and then my other full-time job that pays the bills. Uh,
And all those people
y-
depending on you. Yeah, running
yeah,
a
so
household.
so your life just gets kind of chaotic. And the one thing that I started realizing, and my husband works in public safety, so we started realizing that even though we see each other every day, at the end of the day, like, it's not quality time anymore.
Mm.
Mhm.
And
That's right.
so I started thinking about, like, when we first met, and I was like, I used to leave little notes for him. Not every day, but I'd leave little notes for him. And then generally he would like have some type of whatever surprise for me. And I know, Nick, you recently saw one of my social posts about him leaving some chocolate in my
Right,
car. But,
right, right.
and what sparked that was because I started trying to go back to that
Mm.
intention, to where I have carved out, and my goal is at least once a week to sit down. And so I have a planner where I notate little things he's done throughout the week, and then I write him a letter bringing all those things back up, and I hide it somewhere in the house for him to find.
I love it.
Nice.
But that's
That's
become kind of a ritual, and it's with intention, because I'm trying to bring our that connectivity back to our relationship. Not that our relationship was on the rocks or anything, but just to, as our kids are, moving into empty nester stage,
mm,
to have that reconnection, that intimacy that we don't find in that crazy busy day life. So I love everything you guys are sharing, because I think that's partly why people feel that burnout, is because we're not being intentional, we're not finding
mhm,
those
mhm.
moments in our
Well, you
lives.
have to create those moments to again
Mhm.
express to I mean, I'm not the relationship expert here, but I've learned from my sister, like you recommit, you choose to be
Mhm.
there. You
Mhm.
can leave
Yeah.
just saying I can leave at any time. That's very freeing because then you actively choose to be there and recommit. So my sister and her partner, I think they've been together 38 years, 40 years. And she'll say, the only commitment we made, sorry, Virginia, I tend to repeat myself on this podcast, but, people say, oh, we grew apart. And I guess that's a form of burnout, right? We grew
Hmm.
apart.
Hmm.
And she'll say, well, but the only commitment we made is to continue to learn and grow and get to know the new person. So they kind of like your note, although yours sounds more
Yeah.
fun. They kind of write a love letter to each other every year and recommit. Here's what I like about you now, not the person I married, but here's what I love about you now. I love that idea, just recommitting,
Yeah.
choosing your circumstances and conditions at all times.
Yeah.
Or it's been said, maybe it was Thich Nhat Hanh that said it, that you may not have chosen all the conditions in your life, but it's pretty helpful to just act as if you did. All
Hmm.
right.
That's right.
Yeah.
I,
Cheryl Strayed has a similar quote. She says, "You may not be in control of the cards you're dealt with,
mhm.
but you have a responsibility to play the hell out of the hand of life you've been
Right.
given."
I
That
love
kind of
it.
thing. Yeah, I do too. The other thing you talk about that, like sense of relationship, and it's like I learned this from the nuns. It's like because I asked them about, I would ask some of the older nuns about how you live the vowed life, and I said, "Do what's your plans?" And she said, they would say to me, "The vowed life is getting up every day and recommitting my life to live love." And
Mhm.
it's a daily commitment,
Beautiful.
and I've decided to do this all my life. And I thought, wow, yeah, it's that sense of relationship building. um
Yeah,
so
and also another God, we're just quoting people right and left here, but another quote. I actually wrote it into The Seeker, my most recent book, but it was a sentiment that I had heard. How do you trust your partner? And the
mhm,
answer is I don't need to trust my partner because I trust myself to survive come what may. I
mhm,
Hmm.
trust myself.
good.
Did that make sense?
Yes.
Yes.
In that
Yes.
context. Yeah,
Hmm.
so faith, I think getting up in the morning requires faith. Anyway, well, we've covered a lot here and we're coming up on an hour and a half. And thank you so much you gave us really specific practices that anyone can employ at any time, I think. Is there anything we
Yes.
didn't cover as far as like the tenets in your book or the suggestions you make in the book?
No, the most of them, the rest, other part of my book, you can get the book. There's learn. Just talk about some practical things about like one of the actions is carrying a symbol of meaning, exercising gratitude. The other one is practicing the pause and setting your intention. And then how do you just make the most of your time? That sense of dealing with finitude
Hmm.
in the day, and then finding your true north, which is focusing on the essential. Those are part of the 7 habits in the book. And again, they
Mhm.
offer just practical actions. And then I have over 20 journal prompts as well. So each chapter ends
Mm.
with some journal prompts and just an invitation. If you've not tried journaling, again, you could even do 1 word a day.
Yes.
And again, something or express sketches. One of the nuns I lived with, she English was not her first language, and when we went on retreat, we did a 30-day retreat in silence. And she, instead of journaling, she did art through chalk and pencil art
Hmm.
of her day, of the intention of her day, and they were just
Beautiful.
the most incredible. I still have vivid images in my mind
Hmm.
of those of her commitment to love, and she expressed it through art
I
every
love
day.
it.
One
Yeah, I'm
one
a
photo, one drawing a day.
that's awesome. For me, because I'm so trained, I've actually found that doing a really crude drawing using my left hand, which is not
Oh,
my
yes,
dominant hand, with
that's right.
crayon, the more crude the materials, the more
Yes.
direct and intuitive it can be. So I have a little crayon drawing right in front of me that I look at while we do this podcast. But yeah, using the left hand, it kind of takes you back to your core essence or maybe
Mhm.
even your childhood essence, and then using a crayon.
Yes.
It's pretty powerful. I
It's one of my
wanted to
favorite
go,
activities to
yeah, oh,
color.
really?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's been a while for me. I do have some crayons in the drawer. But I want to go back to one little thing because we're going to wrap up. But it seems like this idea of linear chronological time versus what's the other one? Time doesn't really exist, right?
Kairos is
Chronos
called
and Kairos, the
Chronos and
expansive.
Kairos.
So
Yes.
it's come up a lot, Virginia. Like you said, sometimes you're so my word is overwhelmed that there's hardly time to connect in a quality way with your partner, for example.
Hmm.
Isn't it true that time expands when you choose to be in the moment? Like
Hmm.
it replenishes. there's no scarcity there. I've noticed that, and it's a sentiment I've heard. Time expands around you if you surrender to the moment. And
That's right. It's energizing. Your energy is reset and recharged. And Virginia, you mentioned something too. What's important is you were reflective of your life and your relationship, and then you pause to say to yourself, listening to you saying, I need to do something different.
Mhm.
And because it's become routine, and I want to ritualize it so that it becomes meaningful again. To
mm,
Yeah.
to
mhm,
deepen that meaning. And
mhm.
so that's another signal to listen to in your life of self-awareness. If something that you love to do becomes routine and you're not energized by it, pause and reflect on that and think about, is there a pivot I need to do that to make it meaningful and
Mhm,
energizing
mhm.
again?
Yeah,
Something
nothing.
simple.
How do you make something routine again, satisfying again? You just change your view of it, your intention of it.
Maybe like Elizabeth Gilbert, she writes a love letter to herself every day
I
and
see. I
invites.
love ritual. I'm a Scorpio,
Oh
so
yeah, same
I'm
here. I'm a Scorpio as well. So
well.
the
Where
sense of
are you
ritual.
adventurous?
Yes.
I'm the weird mix of like very easily satisfied. I don't have a lot of desires and needs. I'm very easily satisfied, but I'm pretty adventurous. I love to travel, if that makes sense.
Yes,
But
totally.
like speaking of routine, like I'm the weirdo who likes routine sex. It doesn't always have to be right. A romance novel. Routine is fine with me. Is that's
It's
not the
okay.
norm, is it?
Predictability leads to accountability, leads to I'm a risk manager and there's,
Oh,
and it's like you want something predictable, that holds people accountable and repeatable. And
right, right.
you know, the outcome of that is progress sometimes, but the other time is that sense of self-satisfaction of, there's some things in life that it's really good to lean into predictability and
Hmm.
repeatability and accountability, and again that can become routine, but then it's like, how do I make that meaningful?
Yes.
And it may look boring on the outside from somebody else,
Yeah, but I
but
think
gosh,
people
it's
are always looking, the grass is always greener, right? And
right,
maybe people need to, it's almost like the Wizard of Oz, to be really corny.
right,
Everything
yeah.
you need is in your own backyard. If
Hmm.
you just shift
Yeah.
out the lens through which you're viewing it, it's kind of an inside job, isn't it? Contentment.
Yeah, yes,
Mhm.
I just
it's
think
an
we live in a
inside job.
society where we're more apt to change the channel or move on instead of just adjusting the lens, you know?
That's right. Yeah, so most often we're in charge of focusing the lens to find the clarity,
Beautiful.
and sometimes that's hard to do. And there's no hack on like Netflix or Hulu or anything. Sometimes we just want to kick back and just forget about life, and that's okay. But if we spend 40, 70, 150 hours a week doing that, it's maybe we need to rethink how we reflect on life as opposed to
Yeah,
escaping life.
I love it. Yeah. There anyway, I'm sounding a little negative. I hate to make
Oh no.
generalization. Everybody's different too, but
Yeah.
I think there are some universal phenomena that we're talking about here. And again, burnout, just to go quickly back to that, like I did not see it operating in my life, but I will say for me, I was on a job where I was unappreciated for too long.
Hmm.
And I just didn't look out for myself. I didn't have the tools like you. I grew up in an alcoholic household and plenty of dysfunction. And so I didn't really know how to get out because my peptide addictions are just staying in bad situations for way too long when they simply don't serve me. Anyway, I was just on a job for too long where I was actually not just unappreciated, but it was messed up in a lot of ways. So I put up with literal just ethical lapses and abuses. And that's when I got sick, Virginia.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm sorry, I'm not exempt from burnout because I allowed that to happen. I physically got sick because of the, I guess it's called stress, like
Right.
emotional stress.
Yeah,
Yeah.
internalized stress. Well, I was gonna say, and I think what Denise has talked about through this whole podcast episode about the mindfulness is if we work in environments where everybody at every level, from the janitor to the CEO,
Mm-hmm.
takes those moments, takes the time to pause, shows gratitude,
Hmm.
to
Mm-hmm.
someone, I think we would see less burnout amongst each other because we are being more of the collective, and supporting each other versus, you know, what the productivity outcome is.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Awesome. Well, God, I think there's so much in here. I think our listeners will really benefit from this. So I
Mm.
feel like I already gave you this prompt, but any last words of wisdom? Anything else you can definitely come on for a part two if you ever feel like it.
I would love to come out. I so enjoyed talking with both of you. I'm
Thank you.
very energized by this conversation. And I want to say to all the listeners, I want to say, if I can do it, you can do it, in the sense that it's just the intention to lead a reflective life. It's like it's part of this journey of our lives. And if you've not started, and if you're 80 years old, you can do it. If you've just 19 or 20 and you're wanting to do it, and everyone in between, it's the sense that moment can be there now, and it's not, and we have all the tools within us to do
Mm,
that. So I just encourage you to think about that, reflect about that, and to take that step to what I call clear the chaos of your life and mind the moment, because the
mm.
moment is timeless. And
Mind the moment. I'm going to make that
yes,
bumper sticker. I
I
love
want to make a T-shirt. That's one of my
that.
one of my principles in the book. Is clear the chaos, mind the moment, like internally set your mindset, and then clear the chaos. It's
That's
like set
awesome.
your intention and then work at doing, to be present. So thank you
Wow.
all for that opportunity, for listening. Thank you.
Thank you. It's very
Thank
inspiring
you.
stuff. Wow.
Thank you.
I'm going to go out and be intentional. No,
And have fun along the way. Definitely.
I love that. Words of wisdom. Well, thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for being here, Virginia. Any final words?
No, I think we've said it all.
Pretty much, yeah. Okay, guys, thank you so much. And for our listeners, remember, life is story, and we can get our hands in the clay. Individually and collectively, we can write a new story. See you next time.
We want to take a moment to thank our wonderful listeners and supporters. Your continued support and sharing of our podcast helps us spread the transformative power of storytelling. If you enjoy our episodes, please rate and review us on your favorite platform and share the podcast with friends and family. For more enriching conversations and insights, subscribe to Language of the Soul podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you listen to podcasts. Follow us on social media and visit our Patreon website for the latest updates and exclusive content. Your support helps us continue to bring these important stories to life. If you'd like to support us further, consider joining our Patreon community for exclusive content and donation options. Every bit of support helps us reach more hearts and minds.